Welcome to the latest episode of the Build and Thrive podcast with me, Stuart Mace. I am the Director of Workplace Health and Wellbeing at Construction Health and Wellbeing. And today's episode is, for me, really quite an exciting one where we have a practitioner on this episode. Just before I get into that, I need to just shout out a word to our sponsor, GKR Scaffolding, for making this show happen and supporting us along our journey. So let's get into it. This is one where this episode will be demonstrating turning awareness into action. I'd like to welcome my guest. I'm just going to say Nat, because as familiar viewers will know, I'd like to do a kind of like a mastermind introduction. So, Nat, could you please tell me your full name?
Yep, my full name's Natalie Harvey.
No middle name?
I do have a middle name. It's a really plain one, Natalie Jane. I think it's a very plain Jane, very plain Jane.
Nothing embarrassing there. And what is your occupation?
So my current occupation is I'm a health specialist. I work at Balfour Beatty and I've worked in the health department since 2012.
Okay. And if you were a mastermind, what would your specialised subject be?
You know what? I thought about this the other day as well, because I don't know if you've been recently watching the new TV show, The Floor. It's kind of like Mastermind, but a little bit more simple TV. And we literally had this discussion the other day watching it, and mine would definitely be Boyzone. It would have to be Boyzone.
Boyzone?
Yeah, it would have to be. Yeah.
Right. As you can tell by my reaction, I was like, what? What? Okay, yeah. So obviously there's a follow-up question.
Yeah.
Boyzone, Westlife, were they sort of competitors in the whatever it was? Or?
No, they weren't out at the same time. It was Take That Boyzone. It was kind of, yeah, it was like the Man U, Man City divide. You had to choose one of them.
Is it?
Yeah, I was 100% Boyzone.
Is that Ronan Keating Boyzone?
It is, yeah.
Is it?
He wasn't my favourite, though.
Okay.
He wasn't my favourite.
Right, okay. Who was? Dare I ask?
Stephen. Yes, the unfortunate one that passed away. That was my favourite one.
Yeah.
Lifelong obsession. Yeah.
Well, you'll be glad to hear, I won't ask you to break into song, but on a karaoke night, if I was to ask you to give a favourite number, what would it be?
Oh, do you know what? I'm not to say I absolutely adore music. I only really like pop music. So I'm not a huge music lover in general. It'd probably have to be a Boyzone song, but they're all a little bit sad and slow, aren't they? All a little bit sad and slow. Yeah, probably. Do you know what? I walked down the aisle to a Boyzone song as well. So I'd have to do that one.
You did, or you would?
I did. My husband allowed us to have a Boyzone song as our walking down the aisle song. So, yeah, I'd have to do that one.
Fair play. Funny you should mention that. I was this weekend just gone. I was with my cousin who came over from Ireland. Hadn't seen her for 8 years. Anyway, I think the last time I saw her, she was 5. She's now 25, so that'll be around about 20 years. Anyway, I don't know why or how we got talking about this, but it was, what would your walk-on song be if you were a darts player?
Oh.
Yeah, and we started discussing that. Safe to say it wouldn't have been Boyzone track though.
Yeah, they're not very motivating songs, I have to say. They wouldn't put you in a very motivated place. I wouldn't think so.
Yeah. Okay. So let's move on. The reason why I was so keen to talk to you, because we've had a couple of conversations, and I'm a little bit in awe actually, because I've spoken to you a couple of times and see you as the person who is helping Balfour at the coalface of keeping an ISO 45003 accreditation. And those regular viewers of the show will know this is our wheelhouse. This is where we like to help our clients and what have you. So most of this conversation is going to be around 45,003. We're probably going to geek out and go on far too long, but we'll try and keep it to time. But I just want to really sort of start at the beginning with the 45,003 journey that Balfour Beatty have been on. So why did Balfour decide to go and gain the 45,003 accreditation?
So it was a few years ago now, probably around 3 years ago now, that we first started having discussions around 45,003. We heard a few little companies had gone and got it. We read about it. Various things came out about 45,003. And for us as a business, we're a big company, Balfour Beatty. We've got thousands of people employed with us. A really big structure, a really big organisational chart, lots of business units, lots of projects. But at the end of the day, when we looked into it, it was more around, for the past few years, we have had a top level objective from our health and safety and wellbeing team in general. One of the top objectives has always been deliver wellbeing. It has always been kind of at the top face, coming down from our group health and safety director, Lee. And it's always been one of the things that we've been striving to achieve every single year for quite a number of years. And obviously coming down from deliver wellbeing for our own health and safety strategy, health and wellbeing strategy at Balfour Beatty, it is one of the 3 pillars of the health team's objectives. Deliver wellbeing. It's a really pivotal objective that we've been taking forward for the last few years. And the reason we wanted to go for 45,003 is we wanted a benchmark. We wanted a framework. One of the hardest things about managing wellbeing in a business of our size is consistency, having the same consistent approach throughout every project. I think at the moment we've got around, I'd say about 350 projects, 400 projects live at Balfour Beatty. I haven't fact checked that, but we do have, hundreds of projects at the moment. And trying to create a consistent level of approach to wellbeing is really difficult. And our idea was, if we went for ISO 45,003, it would give us the chance to kind of utilise the information we take from that and the knowledge we gain from that to help us create this consistent framework that could be kind of embedded into the business. So any project you go on to now at Balfour Beatty and you talk about wellbeing, they should all have the same level of approach to how they're delivering wellbeing. And that was really important for us. And that was what 45,003 helped us get. And I think you've just got to use it in the right manner as well. We did so much already at Balfour's that people didn't see or recognise as wellbeing. And by looking into 45,003, it was a chance to also every single person on the back that was already doing it, going on to projects and speaking to site managers and saying, "This, you already do this. That 45,003 shouldn't be that difficult for us to get because you already do this." So it's a way to also kind of rubber stamp or put something against what they already do. By having that kind of 45,003 standard, it was to kind of rubber stamp everything we already did. And then also to look at the gaps as well. We utilised it as a learning piece as well. We wanted someone professional to come in, and we went down the route of using the gap analysis tool as well. We actually utilised that. That's an extra thing you can add on when you do 45,003. And we decided to do that as well because who doesn't want an expert to come in and tell you the bits that you could improve on? And that also gave us a fantastic action plan to go forward with, to put in place what they said we could potentially improve. And that's put us even better forward facing with our projects to put those improvements in.
Yeah, and you've raised some good points there. I think the ones that stand out to me are certainly the consistency across. I mean, obviously Balfour, as we know, is probably one of the, if not the biggest tier one in the UK, certainly one of the biggest ones. But to get that consistency, and I think when you do have a standard in place, it will allow, the phrase I come out with a lot is, if the tide rises, all the boat rises, and therefore it is that. Making sure you've got that, you've got that level across an organisation, because you do find there's microclimates there. And the point you made there about actually there's probably a lot that's already going on, but unconsciously or subconsciously we're not actually that aware of it, which probably leads me to the question, actually, just in case some of our listeners aren't aware. What is 45,000 and ISO 45,003 in your mind?
So 45,003, it complements ISO 45,000. It complements 45,001 perfectly. And basically, it's the first ever global standard that kind of helps workplaces gain guidelines and gain practices on how to manage psychosocial risks in the workplace. So it's the first global standard that's come out with, it's a very long document, but it's all designed to give a workplace guidance on basically how to identify, how to control, and how to prevent psychological harm before it happens. Whereas, over the past 10 years, it's been more about reactive control, reactive management. But this standard has been put in place to help organisations see how they can identify and control them first, and help prevent harm.
Yeah, excellent. Good. I mean, for you to do that within 30 seconds is pretty good, demonstrating obviously your understanding and knowledge of it. And one thing I've also noticed with 45,003, it's not as difficult as what people think it is.
No.
And let's be honest, if you can roll it out across Balfour Beatty, you could probably do it anywhere. And I do appreciate that some.
It's the wording and the jargon that was what was hardest to roll out. All the new words of terminology around. A lot of people have only just really got their heads around mental health. And when you talk around mental health, everyone has mental health. It's mental health. It's poor mental health. It took a while to embed that kind of concept onto people, that when someone says mental health, it doesn't always mean bad. You can have good mental health.
No.
So introducing a standard that introduced brand new terminology into Balfour Beatty was probably the hardest part of it. It was implementing words around, psychological health and safety, psychosocial risks. It was all of those wordings that was probably the hardest part of it. And going and speaking to our supervisors, if you went onto a site and said, we're going to be looking at getting 45,003, we want you to manage the psychosocial risks of your guys on site, most of them would go, oh God, what's this new, like, how much time is this going to take me? How much extra workload is this? What do I have to do? And actually, when you sit and read that document, which, like I said, it's a very long guidance document, but it's incredibly useful. If you really sit down and read it, it's the basic of every other risk assessment every site manager does day in, day out for all the practical risks. All it teaches you is you identify the hazard, you assess the risk, you implement your controls, and you monitor and you review. It's the same process you do for every other risk on your site. The only difference is you're doing it for a psychosocial risk, not a physical danger, not a physical risk. And it was getting that into the supervisors' conversations around, please don't be worried about 45,003. Don't be scared about this coming. You do this day in, day out already. You understand this process. It's familiar. It's just a different concept and a different risk you're taking into that assess level. It's just about the person rather than the environment. And that helped us massively.
Yeah. And again, you make such a crucial point where we are told language is important, and I understand that, and I do get that. And I was talking to a client about a month ago, and he kind of raised that point as well, where they were saying, I'm going on a site and I'm using the word psychosocial risk, and people are just looking at me as to say, what? And can we use a different word? And yeah, you can. I mean, it's up to you what you want, what you realistically you want to call it within your workplace. What as in what's going to resonate and what language is going to fit. But externally, that's what's going to be called.
Yeah.
And it's really just getting used to the name and breaking it down and understanding getting used to the term and understanding what it means. And once you have got your mind around that, and it's not realistically that difficult to do. You're absolutely right. It's plan, do, check, act. I mean, there's nothing new with it that we don't know, and our health and safety and wellbeing teams don't know how to do.
And
already.
It's actually an easier concept to grasp as well, because you're doing your plan, check, plan, do, check, and act, but the person who it's affecting is a physical person who can speak to you. So you're constantly getting feedback. It's an easier risk to go through, identify, assess, control, monitor, because you've got someone to physically ask. And that was a really big conversation we had at the beginning, actually. It was one of the first conversations we had was, we want this, but do we have to use the terminology, or should we go against it? Should we look to get 45,003, but should we kind of keep in the terminology we're using now? Should we carry on with mental health? Should we carry on with wellness? Should we carry on with holistic well-being? Like all those terms that everyone utilizes. And we actually decided, no, you know what? It's a new standard. It's a new way of thinking. It's not that difficult to understand when you break it down. Over the years, environment and sustainability has become bigger, and there's been words and terminology in that space that has never been lowered or never been. People have got on board with the new terminology from that sense of the risks on site now. So we thought, you know what? No, the 45,003 is psychological health and it's psychosocial risks. That is what we're going to go with. And actually, when you speak to supervisors and say, psychosocial risks, the only difference is it's just nothing that's physical. It's the design, it's the management, and it's the social aspect of your site. That's all it is.
Yeah.
If anything falls inside those three boxes, it's psychosocial, and that's how we've embedded it.
Yeah, and I want to get into that in a little bit more detail just in a second. But there's a point I think we might be skirting around here, which I want to raise is do we look at, and when I say we, I'm this, the narrative, it's not you and me, but the collective or human behavior is like when we don't understand something or we don't want to do something, we look at distraction and then we start hiding behind what it's been phrased as a distraction and kicking the can down the road. So, I heard Jenny, my manager, talking to Martin Wiltshire at Multiplex about how, the word psychosocial could be perceived as, workplace stresses, but people roll their eyes when they hear stress, and people start to roll their eyes when they hear mental health and wellbeing. They're kind of like, oh God, this again. And it's kind of like, for me, is that because they're not actually dealing with what needs to be dealt with, and it's kind of like, well, we're just going to kind of brush that off. And what you said there around that we're going to call it what it's called, because we're going to deal with the issue. We're not dealing with the semantics of the word, of the wordsmithing around it. It's kind of like, now this is what it is. So let's get on and deal with what it is, irrespective of what it's called. We need to deal with this. We need to deal with potentially the risks, the psychological, psychosocial, the mental health risks within our organisation, and we then need to go through that process of plan, do, check, act.
Yeah.
As opposed to, well, should it be wellbeing? Should it be workplace stress?
Yeah.
And again, as I say, the point I'm looking to make there is our organisations playing semantics with with wordsmithing just to avoid actually doing what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think in our case, at the end of the day, like you said, Balfour Beatty is a huge tier 1 contractor. We can't ignore the fact that one of our biggest demographics in our business is men of a certain age. And at the moment, our biggest demographic of workforce is the people out there that are currently the biggest demographic of suicide. We can't skirt around that fact. There is a certain demographic of men at the moment that is a huge risk of suicide ideations, loneliness. They're our biggest workplace demographic. So we can't skirt around that. We can't distract from that, because I believe, and Balfour Beatty believes, we have a huge responsibility because we employ a huge chunk of that demographic of people. We can't be distracted from that, and we can't ignore that. They are our biggest part of our workforce. In my eyes, we have a responsibility to ensure that we help as much as possible. And like you said, the psychosocial, not everything's work related. You might, Balfour Beatty, we have multiple projects that work. They're fast paced, they're deadline driven, they're busy projects. But not everyone deals with that in a poor way. Some people thrive off deadlines, some people thrive off busyness, some people don't. But it's not always work related. And this is what we wanted 45,003 to be in place for, because it's not all about just workplace. It's not all just about well-being. It's about taking it that one step further and building it, embedding it into our practices rather than just having it as an after conversation like well-being sometimes is. So for us now, we have a health risk assessment that is basically embedded at the top of our project. So when a project goes live, when a project is being mobilised, one of the first things our projects have to do is look at their health risk assessment in general. And that is basically a guidance document that lets you select any risk that you believe the workforce is going to have when they arrive on your site. So it's things like vibration, it's things like silica dust, it's things like ergonomics, Legionella. What we've done is we've actually gone to that level and embedded the psychosocial risks in there. So we've now got on the health risk assessment selections that site lead can make to say, actually, this site is quite we've got an Isle of Skye project at the moment. This is a project that's going to have probably 80% of people working away from home. They're going to be working long hours. They're going to be here for this length of time. So it gives them that chance right at the beginning to go, we might have an issue here with psychosocial because our workforce are all working away from home. They don't have access to friends and family and children. They don't have access to their local GP, their local dentist, their friends. What risks does that give? And it gives them the chance to think about that first rather than at the end of it doing a free fruit Friday, to put a little bit of a welcome initiative. We've embedded it right at the top, and hopefully that's changing conversations now on site to understand how someone could be coming onto that site and what that site could potentially change in their mental health.
Yeah. And the conversation has moved on a lot, I think, from the bikes and bananas and the yogurts and yogurt to this. So you started to allude to it there from some of your answers and what you've been saying. But what's been your involvement in Balfour achieving this accreditation? I guess I'm asking you there. What's your job? What do you? And we haven't got. You and I have spoken for hours about this, but I guess from a high level, what I'm looking to get across to the viewers is you're at the coalface, you're a practitioner, you're doing this. So how is your sort of typical week structured?
Yeah. So my role within Balfour Beatty, I sit in the health team, in the central health team. So we've got a central health team that basically works on basically the guidance, the procedures, the documents, the projects and the rollouts of anything health related throughout our whole Balfour Beatty business. Obviously, we also have the health and safety and wellbeing team as well. So that's mainly your health, safety and wellbeing advisors, managers, and we basically deal with them on a daily basis to ensure that anything health related is kind of pushed out and embedded into all of our projects. We also work really close with all of our site leaders, site supervisors. Site supervisors are a huge window into every project for us. And generally on a week by week basis, I kind of work in the middle of the team. So I span across anything occupational health and energy and anything on the other side, which is more your so I'm not actually a clinical lead. We have a lady in the team who's our clinical nurse, but I kind of span across all of it. So one week I could be working on a new Legionella procedure and speaking to site supervisors about water management. It could be about, we've just rolled out a new cost system, so I can be helping on the old cost side, or I could be working on Mental Health Awareness Week 45,003. So I kind of span across both sides depending on where the pull of resource is needed. And basically, the 45,003 was just given to me as a project to lead on from our team perspective.
Right, and in terms of so what's springing to my mind is clearly there's an element here where Balfour is a tier one. It does have these types of resources. You're generally finding that if you've got 45,001, which most tier ones and possibly tier twos have, making that extension to 45,003 isn't that difficult. Once you've done your gap analysis, but a lot of the industry isn't a tier one or a tier two. Don't have 45,001. so and don't have the resources that Balfour potentially have to be able to say, oh, it's all very well, you go around on site and you get your site managers involved in all that sort of stuff. So what sort of advice would you give, our supply chain, or the supply chain, and those who are, maybe only 200 or 300 strong, or not even that, with regards to the principles of 45,003 and 45,001, dare I say, to sort of help coming back to that phrase, help that that tide rise.
Yeah. So within Balfour Beatty, I know, like we said, we are a big company, but we didn't have much resource on 45,003. It came into the central team. So there was myself, my manager Rob, and one other, a lady called Darcy, that was kind of working on it really as a three.
Right.
I led on the relationship with BSI, the people we went to gain 45,003. And basically our job was, we started the relationship with BSI. We started conversations around what is 45,003? What does this mean to us? What do we need to do? And basically my job was to start that relationship, manage that relationship, and then manage all the actions that came out of it. So what we did, we went right to the beginning, and the first thing we did was we said, it would be really useful to have a gap analysis. So the first thing we did as a company was we brought them in to basically audit Balfour's through the health department for, I think we did about 2 or 3 full days of audit with this person. And basically, they're the experts in the 45,003 document. We weren't, I'm not an auditor. I can read a 20-page standard and get a gist of it. But if you've not got that auditor kind of brain, you are going to read it and go, I need help understanding what this even means. Like, what evidence would we prove to tick off 4.1? What does 4.7 mean?
Yeah.
So we brought them in to do a really deep dive gap analysis, which were fantastic for us to start on. And I would say for any company, if they have the funds and the time and the resource to do the gap analysis first, do it. It was incredibly helpful to us. Not only did they tell us what we already probably could achieve and which points of the guidance we could probably already tick off, it gave us actions to take forward to say, actually, think about doing this. Why don't you look at this? Look at this procedure. Think if you can change that. And it just gave us a really great kind of to-do list for a few months and it was only, some of the things were really small. It was changing words in procedures. It was putting new information out around it. It was starting doing things like putting out a post about psychological health, talking about psychological health before we embedded 45,003 just to get the terminology going. And once we did that, really, we just started to work with BSI quite regularly to see what the next steps were. Once we did our gap analysis, we got them back in again to audit us again, to basically see whether or not the changes we'd made were justified procedurally. And obviously, that's only one part of gaining 45,003. Procedurally, making sure all your management system, making sure all your documents and procedures link to 45,003 or have the kind of 45,003 speak, so to say, that's easy. You can do that. The next step is making that operational. So my job then was basically to work with BSI to work out how many days do we need, how many sites do you need to visit for the next 12 months? What do you need to see on those sites for us to gain 45,003? And we ended up with about, because of the size of Balfour's, I think it was 21 days worth of audits throughout the business. And
wow.
And it wasn't our job to pick where they went either. So we couldn't even go, do you know what, I know that project's good because I know the site lead and I know the health and safety person. No, they picked. So they just randomly picked 22 sites, 22 days they were visiting. And my job then was to basically, once they'd chosen the projects they wanted to visit, it was then my job for a year to work with those projects, to create everything we needed to create in the business and work with those projects, those site leads, them health and safety advisors, the health and safety managers, to prepare them for their ISO 45003 audit. So it was, as you'd know with any project, it's various calls talking about what 45003 is. It's embedding the culture and the jargon around 45,003, upskilling those sites on it, and then basically looking at things like have you got this in place? Do you understand what this means? Can you think about doing this? And it was really, really just building relationships with those sites over a certain amount of time to get them prepared for 45,003 so that when BSI turned up and spent 2 days with them, they were ready and they understood what they were there for and they understood what the output was. And I'm happy to say that every single site obviously passed, every single site was visited. And the feedback we got back from BSI was fantastic. The site managers were aware why they were there. They'd had good evidence and good best practice of what we were trying to achieve. And it was mainly the message of around, this is not an audit that you've never been looked at before. Yes, it's a new standard. Yeah, it's a new way of speaking about mental health, but most of our sites were already on to that journey. They weren't being audited for anything new. And yet it was my job to work with them and then obviously to deal with anything that came out of it, like opportunities for improvements, minor non-conformances, like how did we close them down? And then also a big part of it is communication. Like we had a huge part of 45,003 was communications. So it was doing things like dialing onto our all hands calls so that we could speak to our whole health, safety and wellbeing job family, telling them what 45,003 was, why it's coming, why we're doing it. It was dialing into site supervisor calls, going to supervisor forums, talking about what this is. And even things like, we've got a brand new course now that exists in Balfour Beatty from 45,003, which was never there before. And it was funny, you said at the beginning, we had budget for a new course, an e-learning course. And our first thought was, we'll do a stress course. We'll do a workplace stress course. So our budget was put aside and we were going to create a 40-minute e-learning course around managing workplace stress. And actually going into 45,003 was fantastic for us because that's when we stopped and said, hold on, we don't want the course to be about workplace stress. That's reactive. That's talking about it once it's there. That's not the solution. And we went right back to the beginning of the course design and we decided instead to do a course around psychological health. So now we have a 40-minute e-learning course in Balfour's called Managing Psychological Health in the Workplace. And that has now become a mandatory course for every site supervisor. So we have something called the Supervisor Passport, where they have to have achieved certain skills and knowledge and courses at every level of being a supervisor. And that course is embedded into that passport now. So every supervisor should have now done that course. So it was doing things like that as well. So we weren't only trying to gain 45,003, it actually created lots of other projects out of it. And like that, creating that course was a huge piece of work for us, but we knew it was vital to help embed 45,003.
Yeah, so glad to hear. In terms of making it mandatory, you have to opt out as opposed to opting in. Gives a reason why you shouldn't be doing it. So I guess it begs the question: have you seen a difference in the organisation? Now, I'm going to caveat this just for the sake of listeners. And my understanding of what I've seen is that, a lot of health, safety and wellbeing teams think, actually, we can go and get 45,003 in 3 or 4 months. And it's ticked a box because the clients asked for it. And I speak to a couple of peers in Australia, and, they have laws in Australia which are a bit more stringent, or should we say are adhered or regulated more than we have in the UK around psychological and psychosocial health. And they haven't yet, the feedback is they haven't yet seen a shift in the needle moving in general health, I guess, in their population. But my view is that this is at least a 10-year project before we see anything realistically change, because we've got to rewire how we perceive work. But you've obviously answered my question about the headline that you've seen the difference. I'm assuming a positive difference within Balfour. So what's that look like?
So for us, like I kind of said quite at the beginning, was everything about 45,003 to us wasn't about ticking a box and just saying we had it. It was about enabling us to get access to the information that would help us create a framework. That's what we wanted. We wanted a benchmark, a best practice, a process of what does wellbeing mean on site at Balfour Beatty? And for us now, just from getting 45,003, we've changed everyone's mindsets around what mental health is by opening up this new terminology and speaking about it. It's about making people understand that it's not about just supporting someone in trouble now. It's around looking at their social aspects at work first and making sure things like excessive workload, poor role clarity, unsupportive leaders are all dealt with quite early on. But for us as a central team, it's meant so much more to us because it's enabled us to get those procedures into place. That means when we now go on our projects and talk about wellbeing, we've got tangible documents and evidence to ask about, whereas before we didn't have that. If you went on site to audit wellbeing or to speak about wellbeing, you had nothing to read. It was very grey. You didn't know what to ask. You didn't know what questions to, from one project to another. So now we've actually got a tangible kind of evidence base. So for us, like I said, we've got that psychological health course now, which means that technically every site supervisor should have watched this 40-minute course to understand what it means. But after that, we've now got in our new strategy that actually only rolled out, I think there was something come out about it yesterday, we've got a 2026 strategy now for Balfour Beatty for the next 5 years in health, and it's called Protect Today to Shape Tomorrow. That's our new strategy for 2026 and beyond. So the importance of this Protect Today, Shape Tomorrow strategy is one of the pillars is deliver wellbeing, and within that pillar now we have a really easy to understand kind of supervisor mindset, which is we call the CMS model. So it's create, manage, support. So those three pillars inside deliver wellbeing really is a way of explaining to all of our projects what wellbeing is in one consistent approach. So now when we go on site and we want to talk about wellbeing, we don't just start from, I don't know what to really ask them about wellbeing. We start from, do you have a health risk assessment? Are your psychosocial risks included on there? Do you understand the create, manage, support model? And we go through the create, manage, support model. And from that, we've actually now also got, we call it the Wellbeing 3. So it's 3 documents aligned to wellbeing at Balfour's. It's your Wellbeing Committee, it's your Wellbeing Action Plan, and it's your Wellbeing Scorecard. And those 3 things are our kind of evidence-based wellbeing documents now that we never had before 45,003. And they are included in our project portal system. They're included in our KPIs. They're data-based. They're data-driven. We've got a way now on the system to, it's coming live probably in a couple of months. Every single project will be asked that question every month on their data pack. Do you have a committee? Do you have an action plan? Do you have a scorecard? The fact that we can even just in a couple of months see how many people have responded yes from all of our projects is fantastic for us, because before you just wouldn't know what people were doing in the space of wellbeing. And that has all led from just doing 45,003. Having all of these best practice frameworks is exactly what we wanted from this. And it has given us that and beyond. So now anybody in our team or any health and safety advisor from our family of, I think there's about 300 people in the overall health and safety function, to be able to go on a project now and say, do you have your wellbeing 3? Do you understand the CMS? The word's gone out of my head, model, and explaining it to them in bite-sized chunks is what's come out of it for us.
So was that protect today, prevent tomorrow?
Yes.
Was that
protect you planted tomorrow?
And it's planted the oak tree, and that's and again, it's something I keep talking about is the best time to plant an oak tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now, and for me that's what that's done. You're looking at, I mean, who's going to want to work for Balfour's in the future? It's not just the people there today and clearly looking after them, but it's what's coming down down the line, and history tells us, and experience and data and research tells us clearly look after your people, and they're going to look after the organization. But it's also what our younger generation are pretty much demanding of workplaces to deliver, and we need to respond to that. So Yeah, that's yeah. As I say,
And it's what they deserve.
It's part of the
As
oak
well. Yeah, it's what they deserve.
Yeah.
Like
Oh, absolutely.
at the bottom of our strategy, underneath our three pillars, our overall kind of aim is we have a slogan at the bottom now. It's respected, protected, supported, and safe. And that to us is that's all we want all our people to feel. We want them to come in every day into a work environment, into a team, under a specific leader, doing certain jobs, but they feel protected, respected, supported, and safe. And that is all we want them to feel. And construction's a hard job. You know, it's a hard, difficult job. If we can slightly make that easier by putting in place the management and control of these psychosocial risks, which we all know have been problems in construction for a long, long time, you know, excessive deadlines, excessive hours, workload, stress, you know, working away from home. These are fundamental risks that have been in construction for years and will be for years to come. But if we can make all of our workforce come into work every day and still think, okay, it is a long day. I am working away from home at the moment. This is just part and parcel of the project I've decided to work on. But if we can put practice in place to make them go home every night feeling like they've been protected, they've been respected by their manager and their peers, and they're supported and safe, what else can we do? You know, that is the fundamental start of what they deserve. What they deserve.
Yeah, let's make work good for us. In terms of your input, you know, what have you enjoyed about helping Balfour get this accreditation? Well, not even that. What have you enjoyed about your job and what you've seen and where has it been satisfaction? You know, has it been satisfaction for you in the role? You know, what are the aspects of it? Not only putting such a good standard into place, but what you've taken out of it as an individual.
I'd say it's the mindset shift has been the most enjoyable. Working with the supervisors, ensuring we get things out there where people know their worth and knowing what they can ask for and what they deserve. And I think, like I said, while doing 45,003, it pushed out so much more projects and work that we had to do. But actually, the work that it pushed out became more important than getting 45,003. So getting 45,003 was obviously the core of what we were doing. But the fact that it highlighted we need to put psychosocial on the HRA, we need to create a new training course, we need a best practice model, we need a way of knowing that everyone's sitting down on every project monthly and talking about wellbeing. How do we know they're doing that? How do we score that? Like all of that work that came out of it was so much more than what getting 45,003 was. And they became really enjoyable pieces of work because that was the piece of work that was making the difference. Yes, it's nice to have 45,003. It's fantastic to have it. But without utilising what you learn from it to push out further work and further practices, then it is always just going to sit there as a tick box exercise. So for me, the most enjoyable was highlighting the gaps and then going forward with those gaps and putting something in place to close that gap. And it's hearing on site now. You know, I went on a site a few months ago, and it's things like when a project is winding down, for example, and people know their project is ending, there is so much fear of job security and not knowing what the next role is, not knowing where they're going to be put. Are they going to be, oh, I've really enjoyed this project. I'm 7 minutes from home. I've been here 4 years. What's my next one? Are you going to put me up? You know, where am I going to go? And I went on this one site, and what they'd done is they understood the worry around where everyone was going. So they'd spent time, the project lead and the site supervisor, speaking to other Balfour Beatty projects that were in close proximity, like travelable. And they got the site lead, the project manager, and the health and safety lead from that other project to come into their project for an hour or two. And they delivered a presentation around what their project was, what the culture at their project, what they were doing, you know, what stage they were at, how long they'd got left. And basically they were like, come to us. Like, this is a project that's 30 minutes away. We'd love to have some of you on this project. And it was little things like that where you start to go, they're now seeing how that is so important. And they've probably done that lots of times before, but they don't realise that by bringing those people in, that is working on a psychosocial risk. It is creating a better psychological, health and safety environment. And by doing that conversation, many of those guys left that room and thought, oh, okay, actually, if that's my next project, I feel great about that. That's really took a lot of my worry away. And then they go over to the project lead of the new project and say, can you put my names on? I'd love to come to you after this one's ended. And it's seeing stuff like that. It's going out on projects and listening to these little stories. And they're always little stories, but they'll be happening hundreds of times a day, these little things. And if that can change one person's concerns about job security in one project, then it's worth doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe this isn't the right term to use, but I'm going to use it because I can't think of anything else that sort of describes. But it's like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's not actually one big thing, And I'm sure I've told you before, and viewers will probably know that before working in occupational health and wellbeing, I was in recruitment for 16, 17 years, and people just don't make a decision to leave one day. It's over a period of time. It's the small things that accumulate and they compound to be the big things. And it is those actual small things which make the difference. And it's an interesting one, because as human beings, we're only driven by doing two things. We move away from pain and towards pleasure. That everything we do, you could put into one of those two categories, if not both. And there's an element there of what's driving people away from work, but also what's retaining them in work as well, which is moving them towards the pleasure piece. And it's when you find there's a balance where the driving away outweighs keeping somebody. And it is those really small things. It might be just asking your manager for 5 minutes and they can't give it you. Or as you rightly say, we're looking after your future here by just saying, look, we're going to ask somebody to come across and spend an hour with you talking about what you could potentially be looking at next. And it is those really small things, which it's really encouraging to hear, Nat, that the decision to go and gain that accreditation has spun off so many other good aspects within work, and it's whether or not that makes a difference to the bottom line of Balfour Beatty or not. I don't proclaim to know whether it's making a commercial difference. I'd assume over a period of time it will, but it's just the ripple effect to society as well, because again, I just don't see this type of standard, as you rightly say, going to an organisation, getting a box, ticking a box. It's a nice to have. It's bigger than that. It's really starting to understand. Look, we've really got to make working environments, and especially in the construction industry, places where we have a good outcome and a net gain in well-being for society, for those that workforce, those families, and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, and looking at closing it out, because we're doing well on time, which we should both give ourselves a pat on the back for. But speaking of which, if it's just that sort of final question, really, is that if you had a magic wand and you could change anything about the industry as to how it approaches health, safety, and well-being, what would it be?
Can I slightly change that to what I want to happen?
You can answer that question as any which way you like. You are the star of my show.
If I had a magic wand, so if you'd have asked me this 10 years ago, it would have been to remove the stigma around mental health, around kind of well-being. But that's happened. I do believe that has happened. We have come a huge way since I started in health in 2012. So now, if I could use a magic wand to make something happen, mine would be. It's a really achievable one as well. It's to make every single person who works in construction in the next month to sit down and have a meaningful conversation with their leader. It's a really achievable one. But if every single person who works in construction sat down with their site supervisor, their site lead, their black hat, their foreman in the next month, and they had a deep and meaningful conversation around themselves, I think it would completely change the way people work in construction. And it is achievable, maybe not in a month, But for every leader out there on a construction site to have a meaningful conversation with each of their workers over the course of the next year, and then those conversations continue, I think it would make a huge improvement to the way mental health and well-being's looked at on site.
And because I can't lead that, and being the geek that I am, so what's kind of behind that? What do you hope happens behind that? Is it, I've been seen as an individual, I see you as a human being. You're not just a number on a spreadsheet, dare I say it. Is that the thinking behind it, or what's your sort of perspective on
really it? It's I sit and have conversations with my manager all the time. He knows what drives me. He knows what I'm passionate about. He knows what I enjoy at work. He knows what, anything that comes up that might be a little struggle or issues, but he also knows about me as well. He knows who I am. He knows everything about, outside of life as well, outside of work, and all that kind of stuff. So I just think if they sat down and had a conversation with every worker, it's getting things like what are your interests, what are your hobbies, what are your passions, what do you struggle with? Do you have any struggles? And it's just building that relationship with that person. Probably most supervisors do it. Most supervisors probably know their workers more than we think they do. They probably have more conversations. But I think to remove that thing of when is the right time to speak to someone, if you need help, if you're constantly having these open dialogue, meaningful conversations, you're never going to struggle to find that time to speak to someone because you've already got it there. That relationship has already been built. The bridge is already there. You just need to ask when you need it. I think that would make a huge difference. Huge difference.
Nice one. Yeah. So the real question is, does Rob know, your manager, that you walk down the aisle to Boyzone?
Do you know what? Probably not. You know what, though? My whole team knows how much I love them, so he probably would. If you asked him, he probably would guess Boyzone. Yeah, he probably would. Yeah.
There you go.
I would say take that song just to annoy me.
Yeah. Well, there's that. So, so just on the closing reflection, then, is there anything you'd like to talk about that we potentially haven't or should have covered today? Is there anything that you feel we've not touched that's important that you'd like some of the viewers to know about?
I think the great closeout for me personally would probably be around, we've all got social media. We've all got access to lots of knowledge out there. I think it's getting across now. Yes, construction is a hard industry to work in. I know there's lots of voices out there and lots of people out there that put out all the construction facts, the construction current struggles, the conversations around how construction doesn't care and look at all these issues construction has. My closeout would be, people just need to realise there is people out there all the time in all these organisations beating the drum, pushing the narrative, trying their best. We're all on a personal level, one person by one person in these companies, really trying to make a difference. And I think sometimes in construction there needs to be more positive voices around it of what we're trying to do. Yes, I understand there's negatives. Yes, I understand there's huge struggles still in construction. But let's sometimes focus on the people that are in the background really trying to make a difference so that in 10 years' time, those negative kind of conversations are no longer there. That would probably be my final comment. We're all trying to do our best and make a difference.
We are, and I think most people go to work with that attitude, want to do their best, and it's the environment that they're in that potentially doesn't lead to that. And you're right. I can't really build on what you said there. You said it. You said it perfectly. Well, listen, thank you.
Thank you
for that conversation. It's always a pleasure, and for me worthwhile chatting to you. Fountain of knowledge, and as I said earlier at the beginning of the show, at the coalface, and I think that's vitally important that we can see that the passion that's come through on that. If people are interested in learning more about 45,003 and gap analysis, then clearly we can help with that. Obviously, there's Natalie who can can potentially help with that. I'm putting you on the spot there, but obviously you're a busy, really busy person. But as I say, it's kind of where construction health and wellbeing can certainly help. So you can feel free to reach out to me. All that's left to do is for me to thank Natalie once again. Really enjoyed that. We finally got there and getting this recorded.
We did.
And thanks to those of you who have tuned in.